Blood has a smell that never leaves you. Kora knew this intimately, viscerally, permanently. A decade later, she could still smell the copper tang of her parents' blood seeping through the floorboards, could hear her mother's scream cutting off mid-breath, could feel the splinters pressing into her 15-year-old cheek as she hid beneath the cottage deck, one hand clamped over her mouth. She woke gasping, her wolf clawing at her from the inside. The pre-dawn darkness pressed in, familiar and cold. Kora's hand found the dagger under her pillow before her conscious mind caught up. Just a dream. The same dream. Around her, the other warriors slept undisturbed. None of them thrashed in their sleep. None woke with phantom blood in their nostrils. Sleep was done with her for the night. It usually was, after reliving the shadows moving above her through the deck cracks. After watching the assassin wipe his blade clean, that scorpion symbol stark and terrible against his hand. She'd drawn it hundreds of times over the years, each rendering more precise than the last. The latest version sat folded in her pocket, parchment gone soft with handling. Her religion, her prayer, her promise of vengeance. The training yard was empty when Kora stepped outside. Dawn training was mandatory, but she was always first. Had been for 10 years, since arriving with nothing but rage that burned hotter than fever. She moved through her forms with mechanical precision. Strike, pivot, block, counter, each punch thrown with intent to kill. Each blade strike aimed at phantom throats. The other warriors filtered in as the sun crested the horizon, giving her wide berth. Kora had earned her place through blood and skill, but respect and comfort were different things. There was something about her that made people uncomfortable. She was a weapon without a sheath, all sharp edges and barely contained violence. "Pair up for sparring!" Sergeant Vane's voice boomed. "Kora, you're with Marcus." Marcus was broad-shouldered and arrogant, confidence evident in how he held his practice sword. "Try not to hurt me too badly." Kora said nothing. She never did. Marcus struck first, easily deflected. His combination showed decent technique but lacked killer instinct. Then he overextended on a thrust, leaving his left side exposed. Kora didn't just exploit the weakness, she punished it. Her blade cracked against his ribs, driving air from his lungs. She swept his legs and followed him down, blade at his throat, knee on his chest, then a training knife at his kidney, another at his femoral artery. 3 kill strikes in as many seconds. Marcus's eyes went wide with fear. Around them, silence. "Kora," Vane's voice held warning. "Stand down." She held position for 2 heartbeats, then stood. Marcus scrambled backward, hand pressed to his forming bruise. The other warriors shifted uncomfortably. They'd seen Kora win before, but there was a difference between victory and what they'd just witnessed. She didn't spar for sport. She trained for war. "That's enough for today," Vane said, though dawn training had barely begun. As Kora turned to leave, a new scent caught her attention. Pine and leather, underlaid with something wilder. Alpha. A stranger stood at the yard's edge. Tall, built like a warrior but carrying himself with the confidence of someone with nothing left to prove. Dark hair shot through with silver. When his eyes met hers, pure molten gold, Kora felt the impact like a physical blow. "Cassius," Vane said, respect in his voice. "We weren't expecting you until afternoon." "I finished early." The stranger's voice rumbled through Kora's bones, but his eyes never left hers. "Interesting training methods." "Kora's one of our best," Vane said, pride mixed with wariness. "Bit excessive sometimes, but effective." "Excessive." Cassius moved forward, and the other warriors straightened instinctively. He stopped close enough that she could smell pine and leather clearly. "Is that what we're calling it?" Those gold eyes studied her with unnerving focus. "Every warrior has motivation, but all I see in you is anger." What are you really hunting, Kora? In 10 years, no one had asked her that. That's none of your concern. Maybe not. A slight smile touched his lips, humorless. But I've seen warriors like you. Ones who train like every fight might be their last. Who push past breaking because they're not trying to get stronger. They're trying to get even. The question is, even with who? Kora's jaw clenched. You don't know anything about me. No, Cassius agreed. But I'd like to. He walked away, leaving Kora with the distinct feeling that something had shifted in her carefully controlled world. Over the following weeks, Cassius didn't leave. He'd ostensibly come to evaluate training programs, but his attention kept returning to Kora. He appeared at her dawn sessions, watching with those unsettling gold eyes. He never interfered, never critiqued, just watched. Then he started talking to her about nothing. Everything. Small things that had no business mattering to a warrior preparing for war. What do you think of the sunset? He asked one evening. Kora had glanced at him, suspicious. It's a sunset. It happens every day. That's not what I asked. When was the last time she'd actually looked at a sunset? I think it's ending, she said finally, like everything else. Another time he brought honey and fresh bread. Make time, he'd said simply when she protested. The honey had been golden and sweet, and Kora hated how much she enjoyed it. Hated that this stranger was making her notice things she'd trained herself to ignore. Pleasure. Beauty. Moments existing outside her revenge. What do you want from me? She finally asked after 2 weeks. I want to understand you, he said. Is that so strange? Yes. You're an alpha with territories to manage. What could you want with a warrior in a training compound? Maybe I see something in you that you don't see in yourself. You see anger. You said so. I see fire, Cassius corrected. And fire can warm or destroy. Right now you're burning yourself up from the inside. I'm curious what you'd be like if you let yourself burn outward instead. The walls she'd thought impenetrable began to crack. 3 weeks after Cassius's arrival, the nightmare was worse than usual. Kora woke with a scream trapped in her throat, sheets soaked with sweat. The smell of blood was vivid enough to taste. Her mother's voice echoed, not the scream, but something worse. The confused, hurt sound when the first blade struck, the betrayal in it. She couldn't stay in the barracks. Dressed quickly, slipped outside, found herself on the compound walls. Cassius stood 20 feet away, looking out at the forest. He didn't turn, giving her the choice to leave or stay. Kora stayed. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. Never can. The admission escaped before she could stop it. How long? 10 years. The words spilled out. I was 15. Rogues came to our cottage in the middle of the night. I was hiding under the deck. I watched through the cracks while they... Her throat closed. Cassius waited. They killed them. My mother. My father. Murdered them while I hid like a coward beneath their feet. You were a child. You survived. That's not cowardice. I should have died with them. The confession tasted like ash. Instead, I lived, and I memorized every detail. Including this. She pulled out the folded parchment. The scorpion symbol stood out starkly. They wore this mark. I don't know what it means, who they were or why they came, but I'll find them. I'll make them pay. Cassius took the parchment, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or pain. Gone in an instant. And after? He asked quietly. When you've delivered this justice? What then? The question stopped her cold. In 10 years of single-minded focus, she'd never once thought about what came after revenge. Beyond it lay nothing but emptiness. I don't know, she whispered. When his fingers brushed hers, returning the parchment, Kora felt a jolt of recognition. This person somehow understood her in ways no one else ever had. I'll help you, Cassius said, the promise solid as stone. I'll help you find the men who killed your parents, but in return, you have to let me teach you something. What? How to live beyond revenge. His hand covered hers, warm and steady. You've spent 10 years preparing to die for your cause, Kora. Let me show you how to live for something too. She wanted to refuse, but standing there in starlight with his hand over hers and the scorpion symbol between them, she couldn't form the words. Why would you help me? Cassius smiled, but sadly. Because I've seen too many warriors destroy themselves in pursuit of justice, and because you deserve better than a life lived only for death. He squeezed her hand once, then walked away. Later, much later, Cassius stood alone in his quarters, hands shaking. He knew that symbol intimately. The scorpion mark belonged to the Council's enforcement arm, the unit he'd led for 7 years. He'd seen it on mission reports, operational orders, kill authorizations. He'd worn it himself, and he knew exactly what it meant that Kora had seen it on her parents' killers. The mission had been 13 years ago. Cassius had led the team personally, had seen the rogues inside the cottage, a mated pair, both skilled fighters, both unrepentant. He'd also seen the girl hiding under the deck, wide eyes visible through the floorboards, hand clamped over her mouth. 14 or 15. Cassius had made a choice that violated his orders. He'd deliberately steered his team away, ensuring they never discovered the child. He'd saved her, and condemned them both. If the Council discovered she'd survived, they'd finish the job. And if Kora ever learned the truth, that her parents weren't innocent victims but rogues who'd murdered innocents themselves, it would destroy her. Cassius pressed his palms against his eyes. He'd known this would happen. From the moment Kora showed him that symbol, he'd known his past and present had collided catastrophically. The fierce, broken, beautiful woman who'd slipped past his defenses was the child he'd spared, the daughter of rogues he'd killed, and he'd just promised to help her find her parents' killers. An oath he could never fulfill. I'll protect you, Cassius whispered to the darkness, even if it damns me. His wolf howled in agreement. In the distance, he could feel the mate bond beginning to form. Kora wouldn't feel it until he marked her, if he ever allowed himself that closeness. But he felt it, growing stronger daily. He was falling in love with the daughter of the people he'd killed, the woman hunting for justice he could never give her, the survivor whose existence was a death sentence if the wrong people discovered it. Cassius had made many difficult choices, but this, keeping Kora close, earning her trust, helping her learn to live while hiding the truth that would shatter her, this might be the cruelest thing he'd ever done, and he was going to do it anyway. Because the alternative, watching from a distance as she hunted for answers that would get her killed, was impossible, even if it meant lying to her every day, even if it meant building something beautiful on a foundation of deception, even if it meant falling in love with someone who would hate him if she learned the truth. Cassius would keep her safe, would teach her to live beyond revenge, would protect her from the Council, from the truth, from herself, even if it damned them both. The scorpion symbol haunted him until dawn, and Cassius knew this was only the beginning. Every moment forward would be a careful dance between protection and deception, between love and duty. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Kora's face in starlight, saw the way she'd looked when he promised to help her, saw the first fragile seeds of trust beginning to grow. And he knew, with terrible certainty, that he would sacrifice anything to keep that trust from being destroyed, even his own soul. 3 months later, Kora learned what it meant to live. The realization came during a sparring session with Cassius, his blade dancing with hers in early morning light. Where her usual partners simply tried to survive her onslaught, Cassius matched her, stroke for stroke, breath for breath. He didn't fight against her rage, he fought with it, teaching her to channel that fury into something precise and devastating. Your anger makes you predictable, he said, deflecting her strike and spinning past her guard. His practice blade tapped her ribs. A kill shot. You telegraph every move because you're trying to punish instead of win. Kora growled, reset her stance. My anger has kept me alive for 10 years. No. Those golden eyes held her. Your skill has kept you alive. Your anger has just kept you from living. She attacked again, but this time she listened. Channeled the fire instead of letting it consume her. Her strikes became surgical, controlled. When she finally broke through his defense, her blade stopping a breath from his throat, Cassius smiled. There, he said quietly. That's the warrior you could be. Something shifted in Kora's chest. For the first time in a decade, her rage felt like a tool she wielded rather than a force that wielded her. True to his word, Cassius taught her how to live beyond revenge. The lessons came in small, unexpected moments that accumulated like snowfall, barely noticeable individually, but together transforming the landscape of her existence. He insisted she actually taste her food, rather than consuming it mechanically. One evening, he'd stopped her mid-bite and asked what she was eating. Kora had stared at her plate, unable to answer. Close your eyes, Cassius instructed. Take one bite. Tell me what you taste. She'd felt ridiculous but obeyed. Suddenly the meat had flavor, rich and gamey, seasoned with rosemary, thyme, a hint of garlic. It was like tasting food for the first time in years. I forgot, she'd whispered. I forgot what things taste like. His hand covered hers on the table. We'll help you remember. He taught her to track not just for hunting prey, but to appreciate the forest itself. To notice morning mist clinging to valleys. To read stories in broken branches and disturbed earth. Not threats to assess, but narratives of the world continuing around her. When the nightmares came, and they still came, though less frequently, Cassius simply held her. He didn't try to fix her, or offer empty platitudes. He just provided his steady presence until her breathing slowed, and her wolf stopped clawing. You don't have to do this, she'd said one night after waking from a particularly vicious dream. I know. His arms tightened. I want to. The attraction between them grew undeniable. Kora found herself noticing things she had no business noticing. The way Cassius's muscles moved beneath his shirt during training. The timbre of his voice when he spoke her name. Lower, rougher. The scent of pine and leather that made her wolf stir whenever he was near. Her wolf recognized something in his. Recognition. Completion. The sense that something fundamental had been missing, and here, finally, was the piece that fit. Cassius was equally affected, though he tried harder to hide it. Kora caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Hunger mixed with something like grief. Every time she smiled, a real smile, not the vicious grin she wore in battle, something in his expression shifted, softened, ached. When she laughed for the first time, surprised by joy at some ridiculous story, Cassius had actually stepped back. His hands clenched at his sides, and she'd seen him struggling before he turned and walked away without explanation. She followed, found him alone in the armory, gripping a weapons rack hard enough to make the wood creak. Cassius, you should go. His voice was strained. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's... He still wouldn't look at her. Gods, Kora. Do you have any idea what you do to me? The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Kora's breath caught. She should have left, should have maintained their careful distance. Instead, she moved closer. Show me, she whispered. His control had always been absolute, but in that moment she watched it fracture. He turned, and the hunger in his eyes stole her breath. Then his hand was in her hair, and his mouth was on hers, and Kora understood why people wrote poetry about kissing. It felt like coming home. They pulled apart, breathing hard, and Cassius pressed his forehead to hers. "I can't," he said, though his hands were still on her. "Kora, there are things you don't know." "Then tell me." "I can't," he repeated, and the anguish in his voice made her chest ache. She pulled back, studying his face. Whatever he was hiding was eating him alive. She could see it in the shadows beneath his eyes, in the way he sometimes looked at her like she was something precious and breakable. "Someday," she said quietly, "you'll trust me enough to tell me the truth." Guilt flickered across his face, sharp and painful. But all he said was, "Someday." The full moon hunt changed everything. The compound didn't usually participate in traditional pack activities, but Cassius had convinced them to join the regional packs for the monthly run. Kora had been resistant, but increasingly she found it difficult to deny him anything. The moon rose huge and golden. Around her, wolves shifted. Cassius shifted beside her, and his wolf was magnificent, massive and dark-furred, with those same golden eyes. When Kora's own shift completed, her wolf immediately moved toward his. They ran together. Their wolves moved in perfect synchronization, as if they'd been running together for years. When Cassius cut left, Kora was already matching him. When she scented prey, he was instantly at her flank. The deer they brought down together was large and healthy, the kill clean. As they fed, Kora's wolf felt something settling into place. Mate. The word resonated through her bones. Her wolf knew before her human consciousness grasped it. Cassius was hers, had always been hers. The pull she'd been feeling, the recognition, the impossible rightness, it had all been leading to this moment. They shifted back to human form near a stream, both breathless and covered in moonlight and blood. Kora's heart hammered. The mate bond was there, humming between them, waiting for acknowledgement. For the bite. "Kora." Cassius's voice was rough, strained. "We should go back." "No. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." She moved closer. "My wolf knows you, has known you since the moment we met. And you feel it too. This is a mistake." But his hands were already reaching for her. "Then let's make it together." Cassius tried to resist. Gods, she could see him trying, could see the war behind his eyes. But when Kora reached for him, her eyes luminous with want and trust, and something that looked like love, his control shattered. The mating was both fierce and tender. When Cassius's teeth sank into her throat, marking her, Kora felt the bond snap into place. It was like a door opening inside her chest, like breathing after years of suffocation. She felt his strength flooding through her, his steady certainty, his fierce protectiveness, and beneath it all, an undercurrent of guilt and grief so profound it made her gasp. But then she was biting him in return, marking him as hers, and his emotions tangled with her own until she couldn't tell where she ended, and he began. Afterward, they lay tangled beneath moonlight, and Kora felt complete for the first time since she was 15. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. His arms tightened. "I love you too." A pause, then quieter. "More than you'll ever know." Something in his tone made her look up, but his expression was peaceful, almost content. Whatever shadows haunted him seemed far away. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'll protect you from everything," he murmured, so quietly she almost missed it. "Even if it destroys me." Kora thought he was being romantic. She had no idea he was making a vow. Life as mates settled into a rhythm, but it wasn't the simple happiness Kora had imagined. The bond between them was real and powerful. She could feel Cassius like a constant presence at the edge of her consciousness. But he began disappearing. At first, just a day here and there. "Pack business," he'd explain. "I'll be back soon." He always came back, but the absences grew longer. 2 days, 3. Once, nearly a week. "Where do you go?" Kora asked after the 5th disappearance in as many weeks. His expression was carefully neutral. "I have responsibilities, territory disputes, rogue activity. It's part of being alpha." "Then let me come with you." "No." Sharp, immediate. He softened his tone. "These situations require delicacy, political maneuvering. You'd hate it." "I hate you leaving more." He pulled her close, and through the bond she felt his genuine regret. "I know, I'm sorry. But you'll know everything at the right time. Trust me." And she did trust him. That was what made his absences so difficult to bear. What Kora didn't know was that each disappearance was a desperate mission to keep her safe. Cassius was covering their tracks, intercepting information, bribing informants, eliminating threats, not with violence but with carefully placed gold and warnings, because whispers had begun circulating. Someone was asking questions about the rogue bloodline the council had ordered eliminated 13 years ago. Someone wondered if the job had been thorough. Someone suggested there might have been a child. Cassius stayed one step ahead, making sure those whispers never solidified into certainty. He monitored council communications, watching for any hint that Kora's survival had been discovered, and he investigated the original kill order, trying to understand the full scope of what Kora's parents had done, trying to find some way to protect her from the consequences if the truth ever came out. But he couldn't tell her any of this, couldn't explain without revealing the very secrets he was trying to protect her from. So he disappeared and came home to her questions and hurt confusion, and hated himself a little more each time. Kora had never been good at being kept in the dark. Having a mate who disappeared without explanation felt fundamentally wrong, especially when the bond between them was supposed to mean complete trust. She started noticing other things. Sometimes Cassius looked at her with such profound sadness it stole her breath. Sometimes he held her like she might disappear if he loosened his grip. Once, she'd woken to find him watching her sleep, his expression so tortured that when she'd asked what was wrong, he couldn't answer. Had just gathered her close and held her until dawn. After Cassius leaves on yet another mysterious mission, Kora makes a decision. She's done waiting for answers. If he won't tell her what he's hiding, she'll find out herself. She enters his private chambers, a space she's been invited into as his mate, but has always respected as his sanctuary. His books and maps reveal nothing suspicious at first. Battle strategies, packed territories, supply routes, nothing that would explain his evasiveness. She's about to leave when her foot finds the hollow spot beneath the rug. The discovery of the hidden hatch feels like betrayal already, before she even knows what's down there. Her hands shake as she lifts the door, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. The torches that flare to life as she descends are old magic, the kind that makes her wolf uneasy. The chamber itself is vast, lined with shelves containing documents that span decades, maybe longer. Kora moves through the space like she's in a dream, pulling scrolls at random. Official council documents, mission reports, kill orders with names she doesn't recognize. This is an archive of secrets, and her mate has been keeping it hidden beneath their feet. Then she sees it. The scorpion symbol, rendered in ink on an official council document. Her heart stops. Her vision narrows. She pulls more documents, and there it is again, and again. The symbol that has haunted her dreams for 10 years, appearing over and over in Cassius's secret archive. The documents detail missions against rogue elements, threats to pack stability, orders to eliminate dangers to the council's authority. And there, on one of the older documents, is a list of targets. She doesn't recognize the names at first, but when she sees the address, her childhood home, the world tilts. Kora barely makes it out of the chamber before her legs give out. She collapses in Cassius's quarters, surrounded by his scent, and the betrayal is so visceral she can taste it like copper on her tongue. The man she loves, her mate, the person she's bonded to for life, has been lying to her. Worse, he's connected to her parents' deaths. The symbol proves it. Everything he said, everything he's done, suddenly looks different through this lens of deception. She can't breathe, can't think. The memories come flooding back with vicious clarity. Her mother's scream, her father's blood, the silence. And Cassius knew. He knew all along. For days, Kora existed in a fugue state. She doesn't confront Cassius. He's still away on his mission. She simply relives that night over and over, but now Cassius's face is on every assassin. Now his voice is giving the orders. Now his hands are wielding the blades. She loved him. She'd let him into the most wounded parts of herself. She'd trusted him with the truth about her parents, shown him the symbol, and all along he'd known. Had he been laughing at her? Pitying her? Using her? The mate bond, which had felt like salvation, now feels like a collar. She can sense him through it, feel his approach as he returns from his mission, and she knows that when he walks through that door, everything will shatter. The air between them crackled with tension so thick it was almost visible, like heat shimmer rising from sun-baked stone. Through the mate bond, Cassius could feel Kora's emotions, a maelstrom of rage and grief and betrayal so intense it nearly drove him to his knees from the force of it alone. Her wolf was going mad inside her. He could see it in the way her eyes flickered between human brown and wolf gold, in the tremor that ran through her muscles as she fought for control. The bond was screaming at her, demanding she protect her mate, comfort him, trust him. But her conscious mind knew what he'd done, or thought it did, and the conflict was tearing her apart from the inside. Cassius understood, with terrible clarity, that this was the most dangerous Kora had ever been. Not in training, not in combat, but here now, with her fury finally given a target and her heart shattered into pieces that cut her with every breath. "Did you know who I was all along?" Her voice was steady, but he could hear the fractures beneath the surface. See the way her hands trembled slightly before she clenched them into fists. "Did you kill my parents and then take me as your mate to ruin me completely?" The questions hung between them like blades suspended in midair, waiting to fall. Cassius didn't move from where he stood, making no attempt to approach her despite every instinct screaming at him to go to her. To hold her, to soothe the pain radiating through the bond. But he knew better. One wrong move and this would end in blood, probably his. Kora was a warrior trained to kill, pushed past her breaking point, and he'd given her every reason to want him dead. He could lie. Part of him desperately wanted to. Could tell her he'd never seen that symbol before, that the documents in his hidden chamber meant nothing, that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But looking at her face, seeing the woman he loved transformed back into the vengeful warrior he'd first met, all sharp edges and barely contained violence, Cassius knew that lies were what had brought them here. More lies would only make it worse. "I didn't know who you were," he said carefully, his voice low and measured. Each word was chosen with precision, walking the razor's edge between truth and the protective deception he'd committed to. "Not when we first met. Not for months afterward." He watched Kora's expression, saw the desperate hope flickering there. Hope that this was all a mistake, that there was some explanation that would make sense of the nightmare she'd stumbled into. Cassius hated himself for what he was about to do to that hope. "But when you showed me the scorpion symbol..." He paused, let the words settle, watched understanding dawn across her face, followed immediately by fresh betrayal so sharp it felt like a physical blow through the bond. "That's when I knew." For a moment, everything was perfectly still. Then Kora moved. She was fast, faster than he remembered, or maybe desperation had given her an edge she'd never had in training. 3 knives flew in rapid succession, and Cassius's combat instincts took over. He dodged the first 2, feeling them whisper past his face and neck. The third he didn't even try to avoid. It buried itself to the hilt in his thigh, and the pain was immediate and sharp. Blood bloomed dark against his pants, spreading in a widening stain. The scent of it filled the room. Pack, mate, betrayer. His wolf howled in confusion, unable to understand why their mate was attacking them. But the truly agonizing part was feeling Kora's reaction through the bond. Even through her rage, even through her desire to hurt him, her wolf reacted to his pain with distress. The mate bond wouldn't let her simply hate him the way she wanted to. And he felt her anger intensify at this betrayal of her own instincts. "You lied to me." Her voice was a snarl now, her wolf so close to the surface that her eyes glowed with inner fire. "I told you everything. I showed you my pain, my purpose, gave you my trust, the one thing I never gave anyone, and you knew. You knew the entire time." Cassius gripped the knife handle and pulled it from his thigh with barely a wince. The blade came free with a wet sound that made Kora flinch despite herself. He dropped it to the floor, where it clattered against stone, adding to the pool of blood forming at his feet. He made no move to stop the bleeding or defend himself. What would be the point? "I never planned for any of this," he said. And the words came from someplace deep and honest, even if the full truth remained locked away. "When I realized who you were, I should have walked away, should have sent you somewhere safe and disappeared from your life forever." He took a step toward her, then stopped when she tensed, her hand moving to another knife. "But I couldn't. I tried, Kora. Gods know I tried. I told myself it was to protect you, to keep you close enough to watch over. But somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." His voice cracked on the last words. "That was never part of any plan. That was never supposed to happen. But it was real, is real. Everything between us, the way I feel about you, that was always real. Liar." The word was both accusation and anguish, ripped from somewhere deep in her chest. "You manipulated me, used my trust against me, taught me to live just so you could destroy me more completely. Everything between us was a lie." Cassius shook his head slowly, and something in his expression must have gotten through because Kora's next throw went wide, embedding in the wall beside his shoulder, instead of in his chest where she'd aimed. "If you believe that," he said quietly, "then I can't convince you otherwise. Words won't fix what I've broken." Then he did something that clearly shocked her. He dropped to his knees. An alpha, a male who commanded respect from entire packs, whose name made rogues flee in terror, kneeling in his own blood. Not in defeat, but in acceptance, in surrender. "But know this, Kora," he continued, his golden eyes never leaving hers. "I have never lied about loving you. That is the one truth I can give you, even if you can never believe it." The sight of him on his knees did something terrible to her. Cassius could feel it through the bond, the way some of her rage crumbled, leaving the raw grief underneath exposed like a wound. Her hand, reaching for another knife, faltered. Because this was Cassius. The man who'd taught her to taste food again, who'd held her through nightmares without trying to fix her, who'd shown her that life could be more than a countdown to revenge, who'd made her believe she could be whole. And he was also the man connected to her parents' deaths, the man who'd lied to her for months, the man who'd taken her as his mate while hiding the truth that would destroy her. The two images refused to reconcile, and the cognitive dissonance was tearing her apart. "Why?" The question came out broken, barely more than a whisper. "Why did you kill my parents?" This was the moment Cassius had dreaded since the night she'd shown him the scorpion symbol. The moment when he'd have to make the choice that would define the rest of both their lives. The truth sat on his tongue, bitter and impossible. He could tell her everything. "Your parents weren't innocent victims, Kora. They were rogues who massacred 14 pack members, including children. They violated every law we have, and the council ordered their entire bloodline eliminated. I saved you because you were just a child, innocent of their crimes. I've been protecting you from the truth and from the council ever since. But if he said that, everything would change. The parents she'd mourned for 13 years would transform from beloved victims to monsters. The revenge she'd built her entire life around would become meaningless. And worse, so much worse, she'd want to know why. Would want to understand what had driven her parents to such atrocity. She'd dig, she'd investigate, she'd ask questions, and eventually someone would notice. Someone would realize that the bloodline the council had ordered eliminated hadn't been fully wiped out. Someone would come to finish the job. Cassius couldn't protect her from the entire council. Couldn't shield her from an official kill order if they knew she existed. But if she believed he'd killed her parents as a simple mercenary contract, she'd stop searching. She'd believe justice had been served when she walked away from him today. She'd never dig deep enough to attract the council's attention. She'd be safe. He could live with her hatred. Could die with it, if necessary, as long as she lived. The choice took less than a heartbeat. "I was a mercenary before I became Alpha," Cassius said, his voice deliberately empty of emotion. He pushed every feeling down, made himself cold and matter-of-fact. "I took contracts, wet work, they called it, eliminating problems for people who paid well and didn't ask questions." He watched Kora's face as he spoke, watched hope die in her eyes, and forced himself to continue. "Someone hired me to kill your parents. I don't know who. That's not how it works. The money was good, the location was provided, and I carried out the contract." Each word was a nail driven into the coffin of their relationship, and he wielded the hammer with steady precision. "It was nothing personal, just business. I didn't ask why they needed to die. Didn't question the order. I simply did the job I was paid for." The confession tasted like ash and acid, like poison. But he forced it out, word by terrible word. Kora made a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a sob. Something more primal and broken than either. Her knees buckled, but she caught herself on the table, fingers digging into the wood hard enough that he heard it crack. "You..." She couldn't seem to find words adequate for what he'd just confessed. "They were just a contract to you? Just another job?" "Yes." The single word hit her like a physical blow. Cassius felt it through the bond, the moment something fundamental broke inside her. The last fragile hope that maybe somehow there was an explanation that would make sense, that would let her keep loving him. He'd just destroyed it. Deliberately. Completely. "I hoped..." Her voice cracked. "Gods, I hoped you'd say something different, anything different, that maybe they'd attacked you first, or it was self-defense, or..." She didn't finish. Instead, she started throwing knives again, but this time, she wasn't aiming to miss. These throws were meant to kill, and Cassius didn't dodge. He stayed on his knees as blades found his shoulder, his side, his arm. Each impact sent fresh blood flowing, fresh pain radiating outward. His wolf howled in confusion and agony, unable to understand why their mate was destroying them. Through the bond, Cassius felt Kora's anguish matching his own. Every throw hurt her almost as much as it hurt him, but she couldn't stop. Needed the physical violence to give shape to the emotional devastation consuming her. "Fight back!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Defend yourself! Do something!" But Cassius remained on his knees, bleeding in a spreading pool of his own blood, and accepted every blade like penance for sins she didn't even know the full scope of. "I knew this day would come," he said, his voice thick with something that might have been grief, might have been relief. "From the moment I realized who you were, I knew you'd eventually learn the truth. If you need to kill me to find peace, Kora, then do it. I won't stop you." The permission should have made it easier. Kora had spent 13 years preparing for this moment, the moment she'd face her parents' killer and deliver justice. She'd imagined it 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 different scenarios. In every version, she'd been triumphant, victorious, finally free of the weight she'd carried since she was 15 years old. But none of her fantasies had prepared her for this reality. She stood before him, her favorite blade in her hand, the one she'd been saving, maintaining, perfect for exactly this purpose. It was balanced perfectly, its edge sharp enough to pierce a heart with one clean thrust. The blade she'd imagined driving into her parents' killer countless times. All she had to do was strike, end it, deliver the justice she'd built her entire life around. Her hand was shaking. Her wolf was howling in agony, fighting against every instinct screaming at her to protect their mate. Not hurt him, not kill him. Protect, cherish, love. But the mate bond was a lie. Had to be a lie. Because how could fate bind her to the man who'd murdered her parents in cold blood for money? Kora raised the blade, put all her strength, all her rage, all her grief behind it. This was what she'd been training for, what she'd been living for. She drove the blade down toward Cassius's chest, and stopped with the point resting against his sternum. Unable to push forward. Do it. Cassius's voice was steady despite the blood loss, despite the pain. End this, Kora. Give yourself peace. But she couldn't. Gods help her, she couldn't. When she looked at him, really looked, she didn't just see the mercenary who'd killed her parents. She saw the man who'd noticed her pain when no one else had, who'd taught her that food could taste good, and sunsets could be beautiful, and life could be more than a countdown to revenge, who'd held her through nightmares and shown her patience and made her believe she could be whole. She still loved him. Despite everything, the lies, the blood, the betrayal, she loved him so deeply it was carved into her very bones. The mate bond had only strengthened what was already there. And now that bond was like a chain she couldn't break even though she desperately wanted to. Tears streamed down her face, the first she'd shed since she was 15 years old. Real tears, not the dry-eyed grief that had sustained her through 13 years of vengeance. These were hot and painful and utterly devastating. "I can't," she whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside her. "I can't kill you, Cassius. I hate that I can't. I hate myself for still loving you. But I can't." The blade fell from her nerveless fingers, clattering against the stone floor. But she couldn't stay either. The thought of remaining here, of looking at him every day and seeing her parents' killer, was unbearable. Of feeling the mate bond pulling at her, reminding her constantly of what he'd done and what she'd lost. "If our paths cross again," Kora said, her voice raw but steady with the force of an oath, "I won't hesitate. Whatever we had, whatever I felt for you, it's dead now. You killed it when you killed them." She forced herself to move, to turn away from him. Every step felt like tearing away pieces of herself, but she kept walking. "Kora." His voice stopped her at the door. She didn't turn around. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For all of it. And I meant what I said. I do love you. I always will." The words should have meant nothing. Should have bounced off the armor of her rage and grief. Instead, they sank in like more knives, finding places that were already wounded and opening them wider. Kora left without responding. Walked out of their chambers, through the compound, into the forest beyond. She didn't look back. Even when the mate bond screamed in protest, even when every step felt like she was severing parts of her own soul. Behind her, she could feel Cassius through the bond. Still kneeling, still bleeding. Making no attempt to follow or stop her. Letting her go. Cassius remained on his knees long after her footsteps faded. The knives embedded in his flesh throbbed with each heartbeat. But the physical pain was nothing compared to what he felt through the mate bond. Kora's agony was his agony, amplified and reflected between them, like mirrors facing each other into infinity. He'd known this day would come, had prepared for it from the moment he'd realized who she was, but knowing something intellectually and experiencing it were vastly different things. The woman he loved was gone, walking away from him, believing he was a monster. And he couldn't even tell her the truth, that every lie had been told to protect her, that making himself the villain of her story was the only way to keep her safe from threats she didn't even know existed. Slowly, methodically, Cassius pulled the knives from his body. Each one came free with a wet sound and a fresh wave of pain. He healed fast. Alpha blood ensured that. But these wounds would scar. He'd carry the marks of this night for the rest of his life. Good. He deserved them. Through the mate bond, he could feel Kora running. She'd shifted to wolf form, her 4 legs eating up distance as she fled from him and from the impossible situation he'd created. The bond stretched between them like a rubber band pulled taut, but it didn't break. Couldn't break. They were bound together for life. She'd carry the weight of loving someone she believed had murdered her parents. He'd carry the weight of being hated by the only person who'd ever truly mattered to him. Both of them condemned to half-lives, forever connected but forever apart. Cassius finally pulled himself to his feet, blood dripping onto the floor. His quarters, their quarters, smelled like violence and betrayal, like the death of something precious. He should clean up, tend his wounds, begin the process of moving forward. Instead, he stood motionless in the center of the room, one hand pressed against his chest where Kora's blade had stopped just short of his heart. She hadn't been able to kill him. Even after everything, even believing him capable of murdering innocents for money, she'd loved him enough that she couldn't deliver the killing blow. That should have brought comfort. Instead, it just made everything worse, because now she'd spend the rest of her life tormented by that failure, hating herself for her inability to take revenge, despising her own weakness. And it was all his fault. "I'm sorry," Cassius whispered to the empty room, to the bond still connecting them despite the miles growing between. "I'm so sorry, Kora. But you're alive. You're safe. And that's all that matters." She was safe. The council would never know she existed. She could build a new life, find new purpose, maybe eventually find some measure of peace. And Cassius would endure, would carry the weight of his choices and his secrets, would protect her from the shadows, ensuring she never discovered the full truth, would love her from a distance, through the mate bond that would never break. Until one of them died. Miles away, Kora's wolf finally slowed, muscles burning and lungs heaving. She'd run until her body gave out, until she physically couldn't go any further. Now she collapsed beneath an ancient oak, shifting back to human form and curling into herself. The mate bond pulled at her constantly, a compass forever pointing back to Cassius. She could feel him through it, his pain, his grief, his love, all of it real and overwhelming and utterly devastating. She wanted to hate him purely, simply, the way she'd hated the faceless killers in her imagination. But the bond wouldn't let her. It showed her his emotions in full color and depth, and what she felt from him was anguish that matched her own. Did monsters feel grief like this? Did mercenaries who killed for money carry this kind of pain? Kora didn't know anymore. Didn't know anything except that her parents were dead, her mate had killed them, and she loved him anyway. The last realization was the worst, because it meant she'd failed to avenge her parents, failed to be strong enough to choose them over the man who'd destroyed her family, failed at the one purpose she'd dedicated 13 years of her life to achieving. She was weak, broken, a betrayal to her parents' memory. Fresh tears came, and Kora let herself break down completely for the first time since she was 15 years old. Let herself grieve not just for her parents, but for Cassius, for the life they could have had, for the future that had been stolen by secrets and lies and impossible choices. She had no plan, no destination, no purpose. Just the desperate need to escape an impossible choice between love and vengeance, knowing she'd already failed at both. The mate bond ensured she'd never be free of him, would carry this love and this hatred, this grief and this longing for the rest of her life. Some prisons, she realized, had no walls, no bars, no keys. Some prisons were built from love itself,